afternoon, classmates. My name is Agbadiba, and I will be presenting to you today on poliomyelitis, or also known as polio. Objectives for today. Today we'll be going over the background, history of polio, symptoms, diagnosis, transmission, treatment/prevention, experiment, and conclusion. Background. So, what is poliomyelitis? Poliomyelitis is caused by poliovirus. It means brain and marrow, which comes from the Greek. And the suffix itis means inflammation. Background continues. There are 3 types of polio infections: subclinical, non-paralytic, and paralytic. An estimated 100,000 cases over the last year. History. Poliomyelitis' first case was reported in 1789 by Michael Underwood. The first polio case in the United States was in 1843. In 1952, the United States reached its peak in polio cases with 21,000. Types of polio. There are 3 types of polio: subclinical, non-paralytic, and paralytic. Subclinical polio. Subclinical polio does not affect the central nervous system. About 95% of the cases are subclinical. Symptoms: fever, malaise, headache, sore throat, and vomiting. Malaise is a general feeling of discomfort or illness or uneasiness whose exact cause is difficult to identify. Symptoms may last up to 72 hours or less. Non-paralytic polio. Non-paralytic polio affects the central nervous system, but does not lead into paralysis. Some symptoms of non-paralytic polio are fever, sore throat, headache, vomiting, fatigue, back pain, or stiffness. Some other symptoms of non-paralytic polio are neck pain or stiffness, pain and stiffness in the arms or legs, muscle weakness, abnormal reflexes, tenderness, or meningitis. Meningitis is a bacterial infection of the membranes covering the brain and spinal cord. Paralytic polio. There are 3 types of paralytic polio: spinal polio, bulbar polio, and bulbar spinal polio. Spinal polio attacks the motor neurons in the spinal cord and causes paralysis in the arms and the legs and breathing problems. Motor neurons are the nerve cells forming part of a pathway along which impulses pass from the brain or spinal cord to a muscle or a gland. Bulbar polio is when the virus affects neurons responsible for sight, vision, taste, swallowing, and/or breathing. Some symptoms of bulbar spinal polio is the rarest of the 2 other paralytic polios because it's spinal and bulbar polio combined. Some symptoms of paralytic polio: loss of reflexes, severe spasms and muscle pain, loose and floppy limbs, sudden paralysis, temporary or permanent, deformed limbs, especially in the hips, ankle, and feet due to prolonged weakness and the lack of appropriate orthopedic bracing. Some other symptoms of paralytic polio are sometimes on just one side of the body. This is due to weakness, which results in involvement of the spine. Post-Polio Syndrome. After 35 years when you have polio, you might suffer a complication called Post-Polio Syndrome. Post-Polio Syndrome is a complication that can occur after a person has caught and recovered polio. Symptoms. Common signs and symptoms include progressive muscle or joint and weakness and pain, general fatigue and exhaustion after minimal activity, muscle atrophy, breathing or swallowing problems, depression or mood swings, problems such as sleep apnea. Muscle atrophy is wasting or loss of tissue, and sleep apnea is a common disorder in which you have one or more pauses in breathing or shallow breaths while you sleep. Transmission. Polio can be often transmitted from person to person. In addition, this virus can spread by contaminated food or water. It is also endemic in third world countries such as Nigeria, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Treatment and prevention. There are two types of vaccines that protect against polio: inactivated polio vaccine, or IPV, and oral polio vaccine, OPV. IPV is given as an injection in the leg or arm depending on the patient's age. Most people should get the vaccine when they're children so they can decrease the threat of contracting it. OPV has not been used in the United States since 2000, but is still in many parts of the world. Both of these diseases kill off all three types of polio, and each dose costs $1.90 in endemic countries. Experiment. In 1954, the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, or NFIP, did research on Jonas Salk's vaccine. There were actually two trials corresponding to the statistical design. The original one had a vaccination of second graders selected from around the country. The vaccinated second graders were not given the vaccination. They are the control group. This design was known as observed control experiment. And the other children were selected again. They randomly decided which children will go in the control. Some will go into the treatment. Children in the control group will be given a placebo that looks like real vaccines. This design was called randomized control experiments. This first design, the observed control experiment, suffers from selection bias and diagnostic bias. In terms of selection, the treatment and control groups are different with respect to at least two variables: age and parental consent for vaccination. The critical issue is whether these variables are related to the variable interest, namely contracting polio. The answer for the second variable, at least yes. Parents who consented to the vaccination were on average better educated and lived in more sanitary conditions. As counterintuitive as that might seem, the children of these parents were slightly more likely to contract polio. Thus, this confounding variable causes bias against the vaccine. In terms of diagnosis, the problem is that mild cases of polio resembles influenza and other common diseases. Doctors who generally believe in the value of vaccines would tend to diagnose polio slightly more often than the unvaccinated children in the control group than for the vaccinated children in the treatment group. Thus, the diagnosis bias in this is in favor of the vaccine. The net effect of the two confounding variables in the observed control experiment is very difficult to determine, but could easily swap the effects of the vaccine in a rare disease such as polio. The second experiment was designed to overcome deficiencies of the first. Although the sample of children selected did not represent the population of as children as a whole, the critical fact is that they were essentially identical to each other in all except the variable being tested, vaccination. Conclusion. Polio is a viral disease. It is contracted from person to person, mainly happens in third world countries, and there are 2 types of polio vaccines. These are my bibliographies, and I'll open the floor to any questions, comments, or constructive criticism. Rohan?
I have a few questions. Who created the vaccine for polio and when did they do it?
It was Jonas Salk, and I believe. Wait. So, I'll have to get back to you on the second question, but thank you for the interesting question. Mr. Bayard?
I know there are like multiple types of polio.
Yes, sir.
Of the main types,
I believe you cannot, but I will have to get back to you on that. Mr. Dave? As said before, $1.90 for endemic areas. Thank you for the very interesting question. Yukana?
Do you know why the United States stopped using the oral vaccine in 2000?
No, sir, but I will have to get back to you on that. Kyle?
do you know what specifically what kind of virus, like RNA or DNA?
Well, no, sir. I will have to get back to you on that.